Students, in this short video, we shall learn about the central branches of the circle of Willis, those which are taking origin from the circle of Willis. We will learn that the circle of Willis gives origin to the two sets of the arteries. One is called as the cortical arteries and another set is called as the central arteries. Okay, this video is meant for the central artery, and in the next video I will teach you about the cortical branches arising from the circle of Willis, that is from three cerebral arteries: anterior, middle and posterior cerebral. So I am proceeding to the next slide. I show you the circle of Willis. Just see this circle of Willis. This is the internal carotid artery, continues as the middle cerebral artery. From the internal carotid artery on this side, this is the origin of the anterior cerebral artery, okay, on the right as well as left side, and these two cerebral arteries are uniting or anastomosing with the help of the anterior interconnecting arteries, okay, or anterior anastomosing arteries. Now this is the the posterior cerebral artery, which are the terminal branches of the basilar artery, and this is the posterior communicating artery on this side and on this side, which is just anastomosing or just contacting with that of the middle cerebral artery. So this will form a circle of Willis: anterior cerebral, the middle cerebral, and here are the posterior cerebral, and this is anterior communicating and this is the posterior communicating. So a hexagonal circle of Willis has formed, and then in this diagram we are seeing that the many small arteries, they are arising. This is the group of the artery which is arising from that of the anterior cerebral and anterior communicating arteries. This is called as on right as well as on left side of the median plane, and these arteries are called as anteromedial group of the central artery. Similarly, an arteries are a group of the central arteries arising from the middle cerebral artery. This is called as the anterolateral group of cerebral artery. Both the anteromedial and anterolateral group of cerebral artery of the right and left side, they just penetrate the anterior perforating substance. Similarly, the central artery here which are seen are the posteromedial, which are taking origin from the posterior cerebral artery as well as the posterior communicating arteries. Okay, and on the from the this middle cerebral artery, the posterior cerebral artery, the arteries which are taking origin, they are called as the posterolateral arteries, central arteries. So both posteromedial and the posterolateral central arteries, okay, they penetrate, okay, to the posterior perforated substance of that side. And these central arteries, whether they are anteromedial, posteromedial, okay, or anterolateral or posterolateral, they are end arteries and they go deeper to supply the deeper structure, okay, which are located quite deep. For example, thalamus, hypothalamus, to that of the corpus striatum, that is the caudate nucleus, and the lentiform nucleus, the internal capsule, some part of the midbrain, okay, some part of the midbrain. So many deeper structures are supplied by these central arteries. Okay, let us see now the branches of these central arteries, which are here grouped as anteromedial, and to which area they are going to supply. So we will see the blood supplying to the area by the anteromedial group of the central artery. The anteromedial group of the central arteries, okay, they supply the anterior half of anterior limb of the internal capsule, but they may go up to genu. Okay, so the anterior limb of the internal capsule, then they supply more laterally to the putamen, okay, to the head of the caudate nucleus more medially. Okay, then all these arteries, central arteries, also supply preoptic and supraoptic region of the hypothalamus. Okay, so these are the areas supplied by the anteromedial group of the central arteries. When we see the anterolateral artery here, which are taking origin from the middle cerebral artery, then we will see that these arteries are also called as striate branches. Okay, they are called as striate, and this anterolateral central artery or the striate branches are artificially divided into two groups, that is the lateral striate artery and the medial. The medial artery is more close to this median plane, and these are the lateral striate artery. Now this lateral striate artery, they will supply the internal capsule to the lentiform nucleus, to the caudate nucleus, and to the thalamus. Okay, while the medial striate artery taking origin from this middle cerebral artery, okay, this will supply the caudate nucleus and the internal capsule quite deep. So the internal capsule, then the caudate nucleus, the thalamus, okay, they are mainly supplied by the striate branches of the anterolateral group of the central artery. Let us come to the posteromedial group of the artery, these arteries, okay, which are taking origin from the posterior cerebral and posterior communicating arteries. Okay, they supply here to the anteromedial part of the cerebral peduncle, which is part of the midbrain. So a very small area of the cerebral peduncle, anteromedial part, is supplied by it. Hypothalamus is supplied by it, and the medial thalamus is supplied by this. Okay, and the posterolateral group of the arteries, which are taking origin from the posterior cerebral artery, they will supply to the posterior most part of the thalamus, that also include the geniculate bodies, medial and lateral geniculate bodies, the posterior cerebral peduncle, that is again the midbrain, and the pineal gland. So these are the structures which are supplied by the various central branches of circle of Willis. Now we will go further and we will see, first we will see what are the fibers which are present into the internal capsule. This is just for the recapitulation, or you just know what are the fibers, and if the clinical condition will take place, thrombosis or embolism will take place in these central arteries, then which area is going to be affected. Now if we see the fibers in the internal capsule, we will see that this is the, I mean to say, they are divided into the two different categories. Motor fibers, that means those fibers which are ascending, I mean say which are descending from, and this most of these fibers, they are coming from the frontal lobes. Okay, that is the, I mean to say, precentral gyrus, the, and then the area number 6 and area number 8, which are the motor fibers. Okay, then the second categories, and these motor fibers which are coming from this precentral gyrus, okay, they are called as the, they are grouped into as the pyramidal fibers. Okay, they are grouped as pyramidal fibers, and they mostly consist of the two group here. One which is present in the genu is the corticonuclear fiber, and this motor corticonuclear fiber will go to the motor nuclei of various cranial nerves present in brain stem. Okay, and these fibers, okay, I mean say corticospinal, which is present in the posterior limb of the internal capsule, they will go and end from the cerebral cortex, prefrontal gyrus, I mean to say from the precentral gyrus, they may go to the various levels of the spinal cord, where they will end on the anterior horn cells. Okay, so these are the upper motor neurons. Okay, fibers. So these are the pyramidal type of the motor fibers, descending fibers. But then there is another category of the fibers, what is called as corticopontine, and these fibers are taking origin from various lobes of the cerebral cortex, that is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital and temporal lobe, and accordingly they are known as frontopontine, parietopontine, occipitopontine or the temporopontine. In the pontine nucleus at the level of the pons they will end, and then they will cross to the opposite side to go to the cerebellum as the corticopontocerebellar fibers. Okay, they are the part of the fibers which are connecting the various areas of cerebral hemisphere to that of the cerebellum. Then the third category of motor fibers are also present in this internal capsule, I mean say various parts of the internal capsule, which are called as the fibers of extrapyramidal system, and this fiber consists of the corticorubral, that means from the frontal lobe they will arise from various motor areas of the frontal lobe and will end into the red nucleus. Then they may end into the reticular formation, or they may end into the striate nuclei, or it may end into the nigral nucleus. Okay, cortico nigra, that is substantia nigra. So they may be called as corticorubral, corticoreticular, corticostriate or corticonigral fiber, and this group forms the extrapyramidal fibers. Okay, they form the extrapyramidal fibers. Okay, right. Then we come to the sensory. This come to this diagram, the sensory fibers, and they are in the anterior, they are called as the fibers of anterior thalamic radiation, which will go from the thalamus to the frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex. Okay, anterior thalamic fibers. Then superior thalamic radiation is there. Okay, and this fibers of the superior thalamic radiation will also go to the various parts of the cerebral cortex. Then to the posterior thalamic radiation, and this is the posterior thalamic radiation, that means a radiation which is I mean to say going to the area number 17, that is the visual area. So this is the posterior thalamic radiation. So these fibers are starting from the lateral geniculate body and going to the area number 17, and this is also called as retrolentiform radiations. Okay, and these fibers are concerned with the vision, but then this fiber, this I mean to say in the retrolentiform bundle, there are the fibers of parieto and occipitopontine. Okay, they are fibers of parieto and occipitopontine fibers are going through this route. Then there is another, I mean to say, part of the sensory fibers which is called as inferior thalamic radiation. These fibers, they are going from the medial geniculate body to that of the auditory area in the superior temporal gyrus. Okay, and they are the inferior thalamic radiation fiber, but then the fibers, they are temporo uh, and the parieto-pontine fibers are also present in this this inferior thalamic radiation fibers. Okay, inferior. So these are the various motor and sensory fibers which are present here. Let us go to the now let us learn about the blood supply of the internal capsule by these central arteries. Okay, if we see the blood supply of the anterior limb of the internal capsule, this part, anterior, let me show you with the pointer. This part of the anterior limb of the internal capsule, then we will see that this part of the anterior limb of the internal capsule is supplied by the many small branches of the central arteries. Okay, these arteries are the striated branches of the middle cerebral. Okay, they are striated branches of the middle cerebral. Striated means central branches, okay, of the middle cerebral artery, as well as one of the important branch which takes origin from the anterior cerebral artery and comes to the anterior limb and has its blood supply right up to the genu, okay, of the internal capsule. And this is the artery of the Habuner, artery of the Hubner. Okay, it is called as the artery of the Hubner. Okay, or you can call this as recurrent branch of the anterior cerebral. This is the recurrent branch of the anterior cerebral artery. Okay, or the artery of the Hubner, right? Then if we go to see the blood supply of the genu part, okay, where the important fibers of the corticonucleus are there. Now this area is supplied by many branches, okay, central branches. For example, it is supplied by the striated branches or central branches of the middle cerebral artery. Then it is supplied by the medial striated branch. Okay, we had divided this anterolateral central branches into two groups, the medial and the lateral striate branches. So this is supplied by the medial striate branches, okay. And then the third group of the central arteries which are supplying to the genu or the striate branches of the posterior communicating artery. See this is the posterior communicating artery, and this also send the central branches to the genu region. And some of the direct branches may arise from the internal carotid artery and may supply to that of the genu. Some of these are direct branches, they will come here. Okay, then we will see that this posterior limb. Let us see how the posterior limb is supplied by how many of the central branches are coming to the posterior limb. Here we will see that the striated branches of the middle cerebral are again coming here, and in this one of the branch of this, okay, striate branches are lenticulocerebral, this lenticulo, this caudate nucleus or lenticulostriate branch, which is the large artery which comes from the external capsule, turns medially, and then go in the posterior limb of the internal capsule. That artery of the anterolateral group, that is the lateral part of the striate group, is penetrating here to this lentiform nucleus and then supplying to the posterior limb of the internal capsule. And this posterior limb of the internal capsule, this artery which supplies to the posterior after taking a long course, is called as the Charcot artery, and this is the artery which usually gets ruptured and a person get hemiplegia. Okay, hemiplegia. So this is the artery of the hemorrhage, okay, cerebral hemorrhage, artery of the Charcot. Then this area, the posterior limb, is also supplied by the striated branches of the anterior, okay, choroidal, striated branches of the anterior choroidal, and this anterior choroidal is a branch from the internal carotid artery, okay, and there it also sends some striated, central branches. Now then, this part, that is the retrolentiform part, okay, which is going to the area number 17, this part of the internal capsule, it is supplied by the striated branches of the posterior cerebral. See this? Posteromedial and posterolateral branches are here, and they will supply to the retrolentiform part. And then it is also supplied by the sublentiform part, which is going to the auditory area, okay, in the superior temporal gyrus. This branch This area is or the retrolentiform part of the internal capsule is supplied by the striated branches or central branches of the posterior cerebral, the central branches of the anterior choroidal, and the branches from the direct branches from the internal carotid artery. So these are the parts of the internal capsule supplied by the central branches of the arteries. Okay, that may be the anteromedial, anterolateral, posteromedial, and posterolateral branches. Let us go to the clinical importance of this. When this blood supply of the internal capsule is interfered, that is when some vascular lesion takes place, it may be due to the cerebrovascular accident. In this, what may happen that atheromatous degeneration of the arteries which is supplying to the internal capsule may get ruptured, okay, or a thrombus may form, complete block, okay, complete block may be, or usually it is high blood pressure which leads to the rupture of this small stride branches or the central branches taking origin from the circle of Willis. Okay, and as I have already said that these are the very minute branches and they are end arteries. Okay, they are the end arteries. So either it is the atheromatous degeneration or thrombosis or the high blood pressure which is responsible for the vascular lesion. Okay, now this internal capsule lesion leads to what happens if there is a lesion in the internal capsule. Okay, vascular lesion is there. The central branches of the middle cerebral artery is responsible, okay, mostly for the blood supply of the internal capsule, okay, including the artery of Charcot. I have told you that from the central branches and to lateral central branches of the middle cerebral artery, one of the artery is large and it is called as the artery of Charcot, which comes from lateral side, that means from external capsule to the lentiform nucleus, and then it supply the genu and the posterior limb of the internal capsule. And if this artery of the Charcot gets involved, I will say it gets ruptured, then this may lead to the widespread motor and sensory loss on opposite side of the body. Okay, and this condition, when motor and sensory loss are gone from opposite side of the body, this is called as hemiplegia. So this artery is responsible for the hemiplegia. Equally the other central branches which are taking origin from the central artery, I mean say the middle cerebral artery, they may lead to the hemiplegia. Now the involvement of the anterior choroidal artery, that means central branches taking origin from anterior choroidal artery, will lead to the hemianopia and partial loss of hearing. Okay, the partial loss of hearing and hemianopia may be due to the involvement of the anterior choroidal artery, which takes origin from the internal carotid artery. Now the recurrent artery, that means recurrent artery of the Hubner, okay, recurrent artery of Hubner which takes origin, this is that here in this diagram, this is that artery which is coming here, okay, from anterior cerebral artery. Okay, this lead to the, its blockage may lead to the, or its rupture may lead to the genu of the internal capsule is involved. That means since it is supplying to the anterior limb of the internal up to the genu, that genu if it is involved, this will lead to the lesion of the corticonuclear tract. As I said that the genu sends the fibers corticonuclear, that means from the motor area the fibers are going to the motor nuclei of the brain stem, that is they are called as corticonuclear fibers, and these are the upper motor neuron fibers, okay, upper. So they will various motor nuclei of the cranial nerves will be involved on the opposite side, okay. So this is the, I mean to say, vascular lesion, okay, and this vascular lesion of the middle cerebral artery which is in part tent in production of the hemiplegia. Okay, this may be because, as I said, because of the occlusion, and occlusion may be degenerative atherosclerotic changes, or it may be because of formation of a blood clot, that is thrombosis. It may lead to the, it may be also due to the hemorrhage of the central these arteries, that is called as the lenticulostriate arteries. And this thus these branches of the middle cerebral arteries are sometimes also called as the stroke arteries, especially the artery of Charcot. You can see here, this is the middle cerebral artery, and this is going the central branches, okay, which are going quite deeper. Okay, deeper means they are going to that of the lentiform nucleus, to that of the caudate nucleus here, and to that of the thalamus, and to the internal capsule. These diagrams, okay, shows you that this whole deeper area, that is from lentiform nucleus to the internal capsule, thalamus and caudate nucleus, they all are supplied by the central branches of the middle cerebral artery. And the rupture of these arteries, okay, will ultimately lead to the, I mean to say, collection of the blood in the surrounding area, and will have a very wide effect on these areas. Okay, a wide effect, because of it will involve the thalamus, lentiform nucleus, caudate nucleus, internal capsule. Okay, so this is that will lead to ultimately to the hemiplegia, where motor and sensory loss is seen, including the face onto the same side. This completes the central artery, okay, and the blood supply of the internal capsule, central arteries, and all other structures which are supplied by the central artery of the anterolateral, medial, posteromedial, and posterolateral group of the central artery. Next video will be on the cortical, I mean say, blood supply of the this cortex, cerebral cortex, cortical branches of the, taking origin from this circle of Willis. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this video.